Hey guys, Ghazzy TV here with another Path of Exile video. We're going to talk about Headhunter farming, and that makes me want to include quite a few different aspects to it, and to avoid making a video that lasts 50 minutes, I'm going to build it up in 3 different aspects. Today we're going to focus on magic finding character, and the next one will be with the aura bots, and the third one will be summarizing everything and going more in depth in how you can farm headhunters with a low budget, medium as well as high budget approaches. So this video will mainly be focusing on the magic find character. There are a couple of different ways to do this, and I will basically be focusing on the way I prefer to do it. Usually I've been jokingly calling this the wheelchair build because it literally needs a handler, in this case the support characters, that is making this character get their defensive stats as well as the offensive stats, and the only thing we're really focusing on is actually the use of getting as much quantity and rarity on it as possible. The tree is basically designed to get some damage numbers out, and we're using 5 heralds and then using a cluster jewel with the Endbringer that gives us increased damage for each herald that is affecting you, and increased damage while affected by a herald, as well as Purposeful Harbinger that gives us the 8% increase effective for each herald up to 40%. And since we're running 5 heralds, it's enough to have one of those. Another thing we can pick up later for a little bit higher budget is to add a second cluster jewel, which is using Numbing Elixir that gives you effective curses on you during a Flask effect, as well as reduced effective non-damaging ailments on you during Flask effect. But for the most part, we're going for the Spiked Concoction, which is increased attack and cast speed during Flask effect and gaining Alchemist Genius when you use a Flask. And the Alchemist Genius is increasing Flask charges gained and effective Flasks by 20% for 4 seconds. And this all comes into the little bit of a tricky mechanic, but rather easy to explain, utilization of the Divination Distillate unique. So I'm just going to quickly go through the skill tree with a TLDR fashion because it's not really that important. The way I prefer to play Magic Find is actually with Ethereal Knives using the Ring of Blades Threshold unique, allowing the EK to be a Nova ability. I really like the EK. Other builds that can be very good for this would obviously be Power Siphon, which I would personally argue for being a better choice. However, it's very important to have fun when you're playing. I love EK. It's always been a favorite ability for mine for a very long time when it comes to non-minion builds, and so I wanted to do this with Magic Find being EK Nova. So a few things that's very important to know when you're playing this is that your defenses and your offense is sorted by the aura bot. So what you want to do is make sure that you take away all your physical damage and turn them into an element. Now there are different ways of doing this, such as using the Winter Spirit node on the tree, which converts 20% of your fists into cold, and the node before converts an additional 20%, and that gives you 40% conversion. You can get another 50% from using the support gem Fist to lightning, and suddenly you have 40% cold and 50% lightning. However, you want to get rid of the remaining 10%. Since we are using Sadima's touch gloves, so I'll talk about the gear in a bit, we don't really have access to an easy way to convert your damage into an element, so the other way to do it would either be to oil conversion, which you try to avoid the best you can, or with oil in the conversions, then we're looking at the left-hand nodes being either Divine Wrath or Divine Fury, whereas Divine Wrath would be the better choice. Or you could get yourself a Watcher's Eye that can be somewhat expensive, but would be the better choice, which is the conversion to cold while affected by Herald, because your aura bot should have the hatred running for you. So once you have all your damage converted, the only thing that's important is basically getting yourself some power charges, cluster jewels for Purposeful Harbinger and Endbringer, as well as Flask effects. And basically you're looking at all the Flask effect nodes, and in my case we're looking at Aqueous Accelerant, we're looking at the Primal Spirit, we're taking up Druidic Rite, we're even taking the Primeval Force. In some cases, not something that I would personally recommend. However, you can do it if you want to. I don't think it's worth it, but that's basically the big nodes that you want to go for. We tend to skip the Essence Extraction because it doesn't really benefit the build per se. Other nodes we do pick up, however, is obviously the Disciple of the Forbidden, again to get more damage per power charge, and minimum power charge goes up, not that it really matters. Those are to generate power charge for you as you're killing things. You want to discord Artisan, which again increases the efficiency of your herald, since we're running 5 heralds. And then after that, it's basically all the crit nodes you want to pick up, such as the Throat Seeker crit multi, the crit multi down at Heart Seeker, Doom cast for EK builds, for example, which wouldn't apply for Power Siphon, and just going in crazy with the crit. So once you're done with a tree, which is very generic, you can play around with it as you see fit, because it's not really that important. You just want to make sure that you get the Flask nodes, they're crucial, convert your damage to elemental, get the preservation if needed. So in my case, we used to oil Charisma, but we actually picked up a helmet with the Herald of Ice reservation that allowed us to oil some more damage instead in our case. And we're going to talk about the gear instead, because this is where it kind of differs depending on your budget. I'll take the Flask last because they're a little bit tricky to get the hang of. So in our case, we want to use a Wind Ripper, which is something you can't do if you're going with Power Siphon. However, Power Siphon does allow you to use the Quantity Shield. Now, what Wind Ripper does is giving you quantity of items dropped by slain frozen enemies, as well as rarity dropped by enemies that are shocked. And since we are shocking and freezing with this build quite extensively and reliably, we get a lot of quantity and rarity from using a Wind Ripper. The quiver can be either a white quiver, which is what I'm using, I'll explain that in a bit, or a rare quiver that can convert to damage to avoid using a Watcher's Eye, for example. We'll cut the costs for that quite extensively. The helmet should be anything that gives you as much energy shield as possible, and preferably some rarity. In my case, I have a blue helmet, and I'll explain that in a bit as well. Then for pure magic find, you want to use a Greed's Embrace. In this case, we're getting a lot of quantity, but you're going to slow yourself down. You can also get a bit of rarity from that. The gloves, as I mentioned before, will be the Sadamas Touch with a high quantity roll. We don't really care about any other stats. We're just looking for rarity and quantity with this type of build. Same thing with the boots. We're going for the Gold Worm Nubuck boots to again provide us with as much quantity as possible. The rings, the lower body end could use a Thief's Torment. Thief's Torment does provide you with a pretty decent amount of quantity. You have the approach of using Pariah rings, or with a higher budget later, you can get high roll quantity with an extra rarity Venter's Gamble. Since we don't care about resistances, we only look at the rarity and quantity roll on the Venter's Gambles. Now, the belt for this type of specific build that I prefer to play for Magic Find, I will always use Bisco's Leash. The rarity is really nice when you stack up the Rampage kills, which makes you want to clear the map as fast as possible and then loot after the map is done, as you can see in the gameplay footage that we've done on the stream and here in the background on the screen. Other options is obviously a String of Servitude with rarity or quantity, very, very good. Another option is obviously to equip the Headhunter for higher budget. However, with this approach, having a Headhunter would actually make me die more often than it being beneficial, because if I get the Shroudwalker and my guy teleports away out of range of my supports, I will actually die, because this build has about 100 energy shield, as you can see here, when I'm not near any of my support characters. And I have two supports with me in this case. I have one Mana Guardian, which is only there for defensive stats in terms of bumping up my energy shield. So when my Mana Guardian is near me, I have quite a lot more energy shield, but my damage is barely touched because he's not providing any offensive damage numbers. And as you can see here on the tooltip, for example. However, when my proper Scion Aurabot, who's there to provide both offense and some defensive stats, I gain a little bit more defense, and I get my resistances on 90%, fist damage mitigation on 90%, and my tooltip goes up to like 4 million DPS, and it just so much damage, and everything comes from the bots after this. So therefore, I don't want to use a Headhunter. I then stick to the Bisco's Leash. When it comes to the Flasks, it's a bit trickier to explain. First off, we want to have a Diamond Flask for the crit, obviously. Atziri's Promise is a very good damage flask, so that's what we're going to use for that, as we're getting a lot of extra damage from it. And then we're going to use a Lavianga Spirit together with Soul Catcher with Divination Distillate. The combination or utilization of these three flasks is very crucial, because Divination Distillate gives us rarity and quantity during the flask effect, but once Divination Distillate has recovered all of its life and mana to you, the effect wears off. To prevent this from happening, we will use a Soul Catcher. This makes us unable to gain any mana during the flask effect, so I can enable Soul Catcher, start casting my ability, and I will have lost mana, and because I don't have full mana, I can then start Divination Distillate, which will be active for its full duration as long as Soul Catcher is preventing me from gaining full mana. Obviously, I can't cast my spells during this because I then will just lose mana and have 0 mana. This is solved by the Lavianga Spirit, allowing me to still cast my abilities whilst not having mana, whilst having Divination Distillate consistently running. So this combination allows me to consistently have the extreme extra rarity and quantity from the flask, which we are also scaling thanks to our Ascendancy and our Flask nodes that we're picking up. Now, the Ascendancy nodes for this is a Pathfinder, or as I like to call it, a Flask Finder, where we're speccing into Nature's Adrenaline, which gives us movement speed and attack speed during the flask effect, and the node before gives us flask duration and increased flask effect. We're also picking up the Veteran Warrior, which is fist damage as extra damage of a random element, penetration of elemental resistances, and we also enemies that kills that are effective elemental ailments grants more flask charges, and the node before gives us again more flask effect. And the last two nodes goes into again more flask effect into Nature's Boon that provides us with elemental damage taken reduction, flask gaining 3 charges every 3 seconds, and also 20% chance that our flask you use to not consume any charges, which leads into even more flask effect and into Master Alchemist, which makes us immune to elemental aimers during any flask effect, so we don't have to use Shock Flask or Heat Flask, for example, and we do more elemental damage during flask effect, as well as having 20% chance to freeze, shock, and ignite during flask effect to further emphasize on the Wind Ripper quantity increasement that we're getting. I don't really have much to say about this approach other than talk about the amulet that I have neglected to mention, as some of you guys might have noticed by now. And the reason is because there's quite a few different options you can go for when it comes to the amulet. Some people would argue for the Bisco's collar to be a very good choice. I wouldn't say that the Bisco's collar is a good choice because it only applies the rarity and to the magic enemies and the quantity to normal enemies. There are better options, but Bisco's collar is a very cheap variant, so you can start with this if you want to. There are rare amulets that can give you up to 10% baseline quantity that would apply to everything you kill, which I would argue for to be better than Bisco's collar. The other option would be to use what I'm using in the game right now, and that is the Ascetic Gold Amulet. Now, this one has an implicit value of increased rarity, but it gives you 100% rarity to any enemies you kill if you have a normal item equipped. It also gives you up to 15% quantity if you have a magic item equipped. Hence why I'm using a Watcher Sight to convert my damage, and therefore using a white quiver, which is corrupted for point blank to have better single target boss damage. Therefore, I'm actually having use of my white quiver, and I'm using a blue helmet with rarity. Now, obviously, this makes the build a lot squishier by not having an extra energy shield on the helmet, but it does significantly increase both rarity and quantity provided by this character. In the gameplay footage, you'll see me sometimes die. You've seen that on stream, and those times I die is either miscommunication or if one of the players, either me or the support, is moving out of range of one another. So what's crucial to understand with this type of wheelchair Magic Find build is that you have to stay within range of your support or you will end up dying. Obviously, dying is not super important, but in juiced up maps further down the road, you want to make sure that you have full inventory slots on all players before you waste the portal. So having the communication there is very crucial. And I don't want to prolong this video too much, but this is the Magic Find character that I'd like to play. POP will be in the descriptions below for the version that I have up at the moment. There are several other ways of doing it, and I wanted to focus on the way I prefer. And yes, it does come with a mandatory requirement of having a party. Obviously, if you don't have friends that want to do this or have friends, what you can do then is go to the website poeparty.com, where you can list that you are a Magic Finder or a support and looking for other people to farm Headhunters or whatever else you want to do. It's a perfect website to find other people or to list that you're looking for someone to do this with you. And that's basically all I have to say about this video. Obviously, this will be part of this trio video series that I'm doing in farming Headhunters. This is one part of it. The next video I'll upload will be about the Aura bot aspect of this, and then I'll finalize everything in going in depth in how we're juicing maps up for Headhunter farming. If you like these videos and this little mini series, let me know in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions of other types of builds, don't hesitate to let the community know in the comments below either. Hit the like button, subscribe for more content. Until next time, boys, stay safe and keep rocking. I want to know what Kaka dropped though.